Good afternoon, everyone.
Chinese New Year.
Welcome to this breakout session on technology innovation and sustainable sourcing. My name is Steve Harris. I'm Sedex's Chief Information Officer, and it's my pleasure to host this session. I'm joined on the stage here by two industry experts. On the right-hand side, we have Alberto Sartori from DNV GL. Alberto is a senior consultant in supply chain and sustainability. He is technically responsible for global supervision and coordination of supplier, social and ethical audit programs. He has over 15 years' experience in corporate social responsibility and sustainable development, and he has been directly involved in social auditing and certifications, training, calibration, supervision of social compliance audits, development, implementation of monitoring of systems and processes for delivery of supply chain services, assurance and assessment for a variety of CSR-related schemes. A very busy man. Kevin joins us from Elevate, where he is Senior Vice President of Consulting and Product. He leads Elevate's global consulting, product and analytics functions. He has 20 years of experience advising businesses on global risks, analytics and management systems, and this includes extensive senior level engagement with many of the world's largest companies on corporate strategy, sustainability, metrics-driven risk management, and award-winning integrated reporting. Kevin has a master's degree in policy and planning and a PhD from Warwick Business School with a focus on systems theory, collaborative decision making, and the role of data and analytics in performance management. So this session is about technology innovation in sustainable sourcing, and the way that we will share this with you is through an individual view from each of us, followed by a general Q&A session. And I would ask you that if you have any questions as we go through this session, please lodge them in the app, and as we come to the Q&A session, we will share them on the main screen. So to open the thinking, I'd like to pose the question about what are those new trends. We talk about technology innovation. It's a rapidly changing world and a rapidly changing environment. And there are many areas of interest. Some you've heard about so far in the conference, others you'll hear about from Alberto and Kevin. And they fall into a number of areas, so it's perhaps worth calling some of them out and look at whether they're relevant for sustainable sourcing, whether they are going to be a positive or potentially a negative impact. So to draw on some examples, something called robotic process automation, or RPA, the use of intelligent systems for leading decision making, for automating what would otherwise be manual processes, sometimes very administrative and clerical processes. It's been around for some time. Some simple examples. Call centers are increasingly using forms of RPA in the form of things like chatbots. Those of you who have been onto websites and used a web chat capability, up pops a window and you talk away to potentially a human, potentially a computer, and that will answer your questions, or they will answer your questions. And it's becoming increasingly difficult to define the boundary between are you talking to a human, are you talking to an automated system. That isn't anything particularly new. Back in the 1960s was a computer program called ELIZA. It was created at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology to prove a point that it was increasingly difficult even then to draw that distinction between a human user interacting with a computer and interacting with another human user. And what we're seeing now is an evolution of that technology and embedding of it. But RPA isn't just in a call center environment. It's used for many administrative functions as well, automation of financial processing, automation of goods receipting, and so on. And that type of approach has clearly an impact on organizations. It lessens the need for a human workforce. It impacts on the way that businesses will make decisions. It takes that human element out of some of those decision points. And in terms of interacting with suppliers, that could be impactful. There's areas such as artificial intelligence and machine learning. Artificial intelligence, a very broad topic indeed. Machine learning, one specific implementation of artificial intelligence in which a computer algorithm is given a set of data, and working through that data, it can identify patterns, and from those patterns, it can extrapolate or predict future outcomes for other data points. That can be used and is being used in supplier selection. It's being used in due diligence exercises, in risk assessment, in many different areas. It's been around again for some time. There were so-called expert systems back in the 70s that were using machine learning and pattern recognition or guided learning for predicting outcomes on, for example, health screens and so on. An academic example was a system called MySyn, which was used for predicting outcomes in the health sector. That technology can be applied in our space as well, and many of you will be using that to some extent, some of you not yet, but it's about helping, aiding, and driving decision-making. But again, it takes the human element out of that, and we need to think carefully about whether or not we're ready to do that. Device technology, you'll have heard of the Internet of Things, the idea of using connected devices in a web that allows you to draw together the information that they provide to either identify what is happening in an environment, so things like home sensors or factory production sensors and so on. There were some examples that have been used for some years around using, for example, cameras on underground platforms to determine density of passengers waiting for trains to inform decisions as to whether or not more passengers were allowed down the escalators. It's not quite Internet of Things, but it's the same basic technology of, again, using sensors to inform decision making. We've got things like 3D printing coming along, and that could be quite transformational. It allows us to move to a batch of one type production facility, reduces waste, reduces spin-up times, reduces machine and tool production, massive changes in that space. Mobile technology. We're all using mobiles. You're urged to use it in all of these sessions, and even if we didn't urge you to use it, you'd still be using it. So that is contributing to what we're doing on an everyday basis. The transformation has already happened there. It is a part of everyday life. But now we're starting to see mobile technology being used in all of the different environments that you're working with, that we're seeing, all the way down to direct worker reporting. We have a parallel session on that particular topic. And using intelligent devices, smartphones, or even simple mobile phones to capture information directly from workers to contribute to either audit or pre-audit or confirming that outcomes are having the desired impacts. Social media technologies, well-established individual social media streams, but they're being used for capturing both sentiments and hard facts from individuals. And a growing generation now are entirely dependent on social media for many of their day-to-day activities. My previous role was a part of the Automobile Association, the AA. We treated social media as a standard channel through which we would interact with all of our members and customers, even to the point that if you tweeted I had broken down, then an AA van would be sent to attend to you. You didn't have to call up, you didn't have to do it some other way. So social media rapidly becoming adopted as a standard medium. We have big data, a rather amorphous term, the principle being that we can gather diverse, separate pieces of information from lots of different sources, some potentially trusted, some potentially untrusted, to bring those together to create a much better view of a particular area of interest. Those data points will have some challenges. How do you gather that data? How do you organize it? How do you analyze it, process it, and ultimately use it for making decisions, but not necessarily having full trust in it because it's not within your domain of control? And of course, we have technologies that support chain of custody or provenance tracking, such as blockchain. I won't steal the thunder from some of my colleagues here, but that's an area of growing interest. So how much of that is new? Well, actually not a lot. But one of the things that is new now is the ease of connectivity, of joining those technologies together into a cohesive whole, a system that allows us to draw different sources of information with automated decision making, with a way of outputting that and reaching people who need to consume that information through mobile devices or similar. There are some great examples of this happening already. Some of the organizations in this space are using that mix of different technologies for pre-procurement risk assessment, helping inform buying decisions before you commit to a particular route. That's informed not only by self-declared and audit captured data, but by complementing it with independently sourced information from third parties, and also mined data from social media, from news feeds, and so on. And collectively, that information can give a far more rounded picture on the behavior of a supplier than a simple, naive assessment on its own. Now, that's not to say that they're always accurate, that they're always robust, but the capabilities are there. Likewise, utilizing Internet of Things type technologies with worker voice data to correlate either audit outcomes or self-assessment outcomes. For example, measuring activity in a production line or factory environment, comparing that against the statistics and the data that the factory themselves have submitted, and then making a judgment call on whether or not that's accurate. And there are many other examples in adjacent sectors. There's the use of analytics to predict and identify risky trades in financial environments and so on. The retail business use of chatbots and social media, and it's seen, as I say, as a core channel. But my question is, are we ready for it? Can we take those technologies and embed them in our organizations and our suppliers' organizations, and will they be accepted? Because in order for a technology solution to be successful, it has to be accepted, it has to be trusted, and that's a massive issue in many cases. One challenge that we'll face there is an inability in some cases to explain how these more complex solutions work. You'll have heard about blockchain, and you'll have had that explained to you, and there is a very solid foundation and a great basis for it. But it's not an easy one necessarily to understand. Likewise with predictive analytics. Through personal experience, I was involved in predictive modeling in a very different environment, and that is around driver behavior back in the mid-thousands, so around about 2005, 2006. And we came up with some very strong predictive models that would identify likely outcomes of someone driving, both in terms of their likelihood of being involved in an accident and also their likelihood to commit a motoring offence. Many employers whose drivers were put through the programs where that was used were reluctant to accept the outcome. Statistically, the evidence were there. We had an awful lot of data to prove it, but because it couldn't be explained in simple terms, there was a hurdle to overcome. And that's something that I think we're going to face with a number of these technology advances. It's seeing and believing and trusting in how they'll be accepted. And that unwillingness to trust is absolutely natural. It's part of human nature. We want to buy into something. But in my view, it will inhibit our ability to take full advantage of those emerging technologies. So that's my view. To complement that, I'm going to ask Alberto to come up and to share his thoughts on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, and what a great opportunity being here and talking to this wonderful audience. It's really thrilling for us to be talking about technology innovation in sustainable sourcing. And when we were presented with the opportunity of attending this session, we considered internally which case study, what kind of information within this scenario that you perfectly described could fit more into this discussion. DNV GL is a leading certification company, so one of our major investments in recent times in technology has been the digitalization of all our certificates, giving each one of them a digital identity and putting them on a blockchain. We've been the first certification company to do that, and now all our certificates are on the blockchain, and through a barcode on each one of them, every user can check the validity of our certificates, and this, of course, reduces to the minimum the risks of counterfeiting. But then again, in the context of sustainable sourcing, is this something that really makes an impact, or is it something of more interest to us and more to other businesses as our clients? Or the next stage will be to apply the same philosophy and the same approach to other important assets for us, like second-party audit reports, including meta audit reports. And we think this will drive improvement for the industry by eliminating, hopefully, the risk of counterfeiting of audit reports and making sure that suppliers will have their own passport, digital passport, showing the results of any activity they have done through auditing like SMETA. But then, given also the fact that we have been discussing in these days how we want to improve performance in supply chains, and we want to go beyond compliance and beyond audits as well, what else is technology offering that we could deploy into our world? So let me also say that as a certification company, we collect a lot of data from our client base and from our 80,000 certificates put on the blockchain. We also collect a lot of information on our customers' performance with regards to the standards that we audit against. So we collect millions of findings, and we put this information available to our customers by creating a database that we call Lumina, and that allows companies to monitor their performance and benchmark what they are achieving against the performance of peers, of competitors, or the industry. So this is hopefully a solution that we provided to customers by making this information, this digital information, available to them and push them to look at their risks, look at their deficiencies and their issues, and drive improvement from there. Again, when we thought of this, we thought also, okay, this is a lot of useful information and data for our clients, but is it social and ethical data that can make an impact, or is it still related to compliance? Mostly, this kind of data and information relates to findings that emerge during audits of different nature that we're carrying on our clients. This is very useful information for our clients, again, but is it making such an impact on workers, for example, or stakeholders in general? So actually, we have come up with something that we are quite proud of that we call My Story, that is trying to bring the assurance, which is our expertise and the core of our services, into a new era. My Story is a single solution, is technology-based, but it integrates the findings from traditional physical audits as well as other sources of data, like those you mentioned earlier, Steve. This data can come from a variety of sources, including sensors, including workplace worker voice technologies, can come from information provided on a voluntary basis by organizations and suppliers, as well as industry associations or other sources. And this is all combined into a single set of data that allows for that analytics that you mentioned. And it's not based on the results of periodical activities like audits, but is increasingly becoming real-time data captured on an ongoing basis and allowing users to integrate all different sorts of data sets and measure their performance. We're not looking at findings anymore. We're not focusing only on the issues where things go wrong. We've got non-compliances, we've got risks. But if we are measuring processes, if we are looking at the performance of a company, if we're taking this down to the product, so we are measuring the characteristics, the quality of a single product or a single production, we can collect all of this and we can do that predictive analysis that you mentioned. We can anticipate issues. We can put this information available to organizations and make sure that they look at this as a source for performance improvement and risk management. But we've gone a step forward. We have used this data and we put it available to stakeholders in general, up to the consumers. So through our My Story solution, we aim to reach the consumer and engage the consumer in this journey. And I think this will create the element of trust that you were referring to. If the consumer feels part of this journey, of this story that we have created, we believe that this trust gap can be partly closed. So how are we going to do that? We are applying this My Story concept and approach to real case studies, which are currently running, using an app for our companies, for our clients, and for our auditors to feed the data into this data set. These data are then analyzed. These data are then given a digital identity and stored on a blockchain, and then later on they are transformed into a story. And this story is then communicated to consumers thanks to a barcode which is applied to specific products. And therefore the consumer can, through a QR code, can reach directly the information that we want to communicate about that product. It is about the characteristics of the product, its quality, its origin, but it can also be about the environmental impact had for manufacturing that product. Or it can be about the social conditions, the labor conditions of the producers through which the product has been manufactured or distributed. We believe that this concept of digital assurance can help the industry move from auditing just compliance in going beyond audits into real-time data verification, and above all, in measuring progress and setting baselines, allowing benchmarks for end users, and especially for the consumers to be to feel part of this journey. So I think at this time you will think this is all very nice, but is it real? Are you really doing it? How does it work? So luckily, with the help of a few slides, I'm going to show you that this is real. Okay, this is the My Story concept we have developed, and we believe that going beyond compliance is also having a story to tell, which is not about storytelling. It's up to us to decide which story we want to tell. So in this case, we have worked with some wine producers based in Italy, and they had a story to tell about their products. And we worked with them through our app to create this data set, data platform coming from different sources and giving a digital identity to each bottle of wine. This is really, in brief, how showing you how this works. You can see that at the different stages of the farming, the cultivation of the grapes, the mature of the grapes, all sorts of data are collected from the producers, and through the app they are collected into our system. At different stages during this process, DNV GL is present and validating this data through our analytics and verification activities, which combine a set of digital assurance on the data provided, as well as the results from our physical audits. And the end of the story is the digital identity that we associate to the single data included in our platform. And this ends in a barcode which is attached to the product. And therefore, in the next months, you may have a chance to enjoy a very good bottle of wine made in Italy and find this barcode on the product. And if you scan the code, you will land on a page that will tell you the story about that bottle of wine. And of course, will be together with the producer, will be validating the kind of story that the readers will find. So it will not be a marketing operation, but this will be part of our assurance journey to make sure that the information included and that can be reached through this system has been assured from our side. We have asked the wine producers why they have embarked in this journey, so I'm happy to just have them speak to you directly.
My name is Riccardo Ricci Curbastro. I represent the 17th generation of my family producing wine in Franciacorta in the region of Lombardy. My story project will help us to tell you about everyday work in this vineyard, following the buds when they sprout out, following the flowering, following the vintage, up to the moment the wine became wine in its own barrels to the single bottle. For us it's very important. I believe you will enjoy it.
My name is Alberto Sartori. I am the managing director of Ruffino, a long-established company in the heart of Tuscany and the heart of Chianti Classico. Our most iconic product is Riserva Ducale. This product has been established in 1927 and it has actually created the fine wine category within a Chianti wine, which Chianti at that time was definitely not aged and definitely for a day-to-day consumption. Pioneering new venture or new project has always been in our DNA, and therefore being together with DNV in these new techniques of communicating with our consumers is very exciting for us, because they are a fairly important company in the quality audit and for us communicate the quality of our product, the authenticity of the product and the root with our terroir is very, very important. So it's a project very exciting for us.
Okay, so the story that these wine producers want to tell us is about their product, but it's also about their company, and there's so much they want to tell about the quality of their wines as well as their origin. So a lot of the information that we are collecting from these producers is related to the treatment they do on their vineyards, as well as their maturing process, the substances they use, and other data that you can see here. But this was in line with the aim of these producers, and this is then communicated to the consumers, as you see, after DNV GL has been heavily involved in assuring this kind of information. But this is one example of the application of the My Story concept. By giving digital identity to a single product, using the blockchain and data platforms to move from single physical auditing, beyond auditing and beyond compliance into digital assurance, and finally reaching out to the consumer and communicating this performance to the end users. So this was the story of these 4 wine producers. But again, what is the story that we want to tell? Is it about quality? Is it about traceability and chain of custody of your raw materials, of your ingredients, of your final product? Is it about environmental impact and footprint of your product? Or is it about the social conditions and the labor conditions? I was impressed, as I'm sure you all were, about the discussion today and the presentation on modern slavery and how we were thinking of the signs and the signals of modern slavery in workplaces and factories. So is this the kind of data, the kind of metrics that we want to measure from factories, from companies, so that we collect, we analyze this data, we anticipate an issue, and we work on the digital assurance of this data, and we are able to communicate a product which is free from these critical issues. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Alberto. I'd like to ask Kevin to come up and, or to to share his thoughts from there, if you're more comfortable, the comfortable fireside chat we talked about.
Yeah, you invited us to a fireside chat in a brewery, so it felt like we should start that. And actually, this at least can get us bridging to the audience and a Q&A, so maybe I can make it a little bit less formal. I feel in some respects like the Luddite in this conversation, right? Hearing about the robotic process automation and what you've been doing from a DNV perspective is really fascinating, very insightful. I feel like the Luddite, but I'm the only one using technology for my notes. You've still got the traditional paper, right? And that's so interesting because actually a lot of this comes down to adoption, right? And adoption in the field. And what I'm going to do is maybe just talk you through a little bit some of the experiences we've had at Elevate, actually, around testing out different technologies and adoption, and then looking at the industry of responsible sourcing, some of the challenges that come with these different technologies. So some of you know Elevate. We're a sustainability and supply chain company. We've been very lucky, actually, and I'm exceptionally lucky to be part of this business, to have brought on a few new companies into our fold over the last couple of years, most notably CSR Asia and LabelLink. For those of you that were there last night at the dinner, LabelLink and LabelLink technology was one of the winners of the most innovative program. So I'm going to talk a bit about that and what we've learned. But our business really falls into 4 areas. So we do auditing, and we overlap a little bit with DNV in that space, although we don't really focus so much on certifications. We do a lot of social compliance auditing. So we do about 12 to 13,000 social compliance audits a year. That's about 50 to 60% of our business. And there's definitely big opportunities for technology in that area. Some of it is about as simple as actually getting auditors to use tablets and using tablets and mobile phones to take photographs of stuff happening on site and having that then feed in to the cloud where it can be well protected and be covered under all the relevant data protection controls rather than be done manually on pieces of paper and then cross-coded back into systems later, or be done on old phones that aren't connected to the internet, or even using potentially auditors' own mobile phones where there's much less ability to control. So there's some really basic issues like that that apply for us in the auditing sector and auditing part of what we do. Another big part of what we do is program management. So we run the Bangladesh Alliance for Worker Safety, response to Rana Plaza. We've got about 60, 70 people in Bangladesh. And there we've used technology through actually some of our engagement with LabelLink to support with the grievance mechanism, the Amada Kota grievance mechanism that is in place for the Alliance and that actually services 1,000 factories and 1 million workers on a day in, day out basis, to the point where we get around, I think it's between 6,000 to 9,000 phone calls a month coming in from workers in those factories. And there's a lot of data that comes in through that. That's another big pillar where we are using technology. Then we have a consulting team, actually, which is where LabelLink sits and where we test out a lot of other things like worker voice on a day-to-day basis, integrating it with audits. Also e-learning, using technology to actually get to workers, get to factory managers, and help build that cultural change that's needed to actually drive sustained impact, which we're all looking for, all aspiring for in the social compliance space. And then we have an arm of the business which is about analytics. So we talk a lot about technology and analytics. Sometimes we talk about them interchangeably, but basically they're 2 parts of a continuum, so to speak, or 2 sides of a coin. Technology can help us get the data to then run the analytics, but equally, we need to look at that part of the conversation as well and how robust that data is. So a couple of examples, a couple of use cases around how we've used technology. We used to be technology agnostic, so we used to say we would use any technology. But over the last few years, we've been piloting out different things. Good examples are LabelLink, where we've used that worker voice insight and technology on-site at factories, engaging over 1 million workers again, typically on an annual basis, to get their feedback and viewpoints around different issues, looking at that alongside auditor and audit data and conflating those to drive better insights into risk. But this presents challenges, right? For example, if you send out a survey to workers and one of your questions is, what's your age, right? And workers say that they're under 14. Well, how do you respond to that? If you're there on site doing an audit, then, well, you know that your auditor has actually seen the child, so it was validated, and there's a lot of trust around that. But if it comes through in a technology platform, then you're kind of paralyzed. There's no known response to a challenge like that within our industry yet. We're still figuring those things out, and the protocols to follow up on that kind of insight. So there is a good question to ask, and you raised it, Steve. You know, are we ready for this? Do we know what to do with technology and with the data when it comes through from these, and how to trust it and how to respond to it? So that's one of the things. What we've also done with LabourLink a lot is a pilot of whether we could replace audits entirely with technology solutions. So LabourLink and Worker Voice replacing the interview part of an audit, SAQ type data replacing the kind of document inspection where you can upload documents and then people can review that offline. And we've heard a lot about actually SAQ type insights in the context of, you know, the Philips program and then verification as a follow-up potentially to that. And there are values to that, and obviously Sedex has an SAQ component to it as well. And there's benefits there, but again, our confidence levels around that are not as strong as if someone actually went on site and observed it and checked it. And then the third element, which we've also looked at, is could you replace the on-site observation component of an audit? So when auditors are on site, they walk around factories, they ask questions, they check and look for non-compliances, the most obvious being around, you know, fire, evacuations, blocked exits. Obviously, if they spot a child or if they see an incident of forced labor, those things can be logged and tracked. And we've looked at using remote telepresence robots as potential alternatives to that. So Heather Franzese, who runs the LabourLink division, spoke about this last year. Basically, it's like an iPad, right, on like a mobile device that can be moved around a factory and can actually look at any real point in time what's going on in that factory. Now, that has pros and cons. It's fantastic for observing things like fire drills, for instance, or, you know, maybe being able to look at something that's very much kind of a set piece, a set infrastructure, and confirming that it's there or it happened or not, or the fire drill actually took place 6 months before the audit, when they might actually say it took place when you're on site in an audit context. But it's not a great tool for kind of like driving up a remote telepresence facility to a worker and asking them a question, or navigating that from one part of the building to another part of the building. And obviously it comes with data protection concerns as well, and, you know, the risks of being able to turn that on at any point in time in maybe an unregulated context that could, in fact, in some instances present a potential hazard, right, in a factory. Someone accidentally tripped over the telepresence robot and broke a piece of equipment, or damaged or broke a bone or something like that. So there are definite pros that come with this kind of technology, but there's also a human dimension we need to be aware of and look at it with healthy skepticism. Just like DNV, moving away from kind of the on-site replacement of audits with technology-based solutions, just like you, we've looked at whether we could conflate data that comes through these different technologies to drive better insights into program design. And we link the results of audits, all the data that comes out of audits, all of the data that comes out of worker voice engagements, it comes out of e-learning, together to build a 360, more systematic, systemic view of health for a factory and a facility. We do that on an ongoing basis, and it's definitely something that we will continue to do. I think there's still a lot that needs to be done to understand what's the cause, what's the effect in that kind of conversation. But it is something that, as an industry, we need to be better equipped to handle and to manage. But all of the above, going to your point about warnings and challenges, are things I think we need to be aware of and willing to question before throwing ourselves into them full on, because there are lures of technology that mean sometimes we haven't fully thought things through. And blockchain is a really good example. We talk about blockchain a lot. It gets a lot of bandwidth, and you've given a really good use case. But I could ask, I don't know if we'll have time for questions, but I could ask, in that use case, does it look just at the grapes, or does it also go into the bottle and into the packaging? How much of the story are we actually telling? Not necessarily about yours, but in other instances. We've heard great examples from Providence historically about how blockchain could be applied to the fishery sector. But it's much harder to use that in kind of complex component or multi-component driven products. It's very easy on a single kind of ag-oriented use case. And there are other really good examples. Walmart have done this with kind of poultry in China. Star Farm, part of the Metro Group, they do this in scale in China using sort of chain of custody, not blockchain, but chain of custody, and then the ability to scan a barcode on site. There's really good examples of that. But we need to think about actually the long-term applicability across multiple elements within our industry, multiple different product types. And then ultimately, I'm just going to close on one thing because I can see we're running low on time. Let's not forget the business-driven sustainability component of this. A lot of what we are trying to do on a day-in, day-out basis is get suppliers to change how they work. And therefore, having technology is great. It gives us more insight, potentially. It helps us maybe to be more effective on site. But we still need to give suppliers and factories the tools they need. And that means not just doing technology, but also having the right sort of conversations, having conversations around how do we retain workers, how do we reduce rework rates, how do we improve quality on site, how do you help a supplier be a better business, how do you use technology to do that. Haven't heard enough conversations about that, and haven't heard enough conversations about how we can link the business-driven piece, the metrics-driven piece around what makes a robust business with the insights around social compliance to get an overall enhanced, better workplace and to drive that sustained long-term change. So really interested to hear questions from the audience, to go through the polls, and to explore this in more detail together.
So thanks, Kevin. So we do have a little time, and I'd like to invite some questions from our audience here. We also hopefully have some questions from the live poll, if we could get those up on the screen, or from the app. Does anyone in the room have a question that you would like to pose to our panel? Struggling to see through the lights. One over here. Okay.
Hi, thank you. I have a question. I think I see a lot of opportunity from all the case studies and actually over the last couple of days about what we can do in terms of data collection and analysis. I guess the challenge that remains, and I'm wondering whether we also need to be putting more thought into how we respond to what we find out from all this. And I think we need to be looking, maybe putting a lot of emphasis now on thinking through what are the solutions. I mean, I think some of the early examples were things like with worker grievances, we were great at collecting all the grievances. We didn't really have a good way to respond. So just to make sure we don't fall into that trap again with these new technologies.
I think that's a very fair point, and it plays to the issue that Kevin was raising about recognizing the likely outcome of technology decisions, whether it be a remote device in a factory or a worker grievance capture or the mechanism for identifying underage workers at a site. And I think it's important that there is some effort put into the necessary actions that come out of that. Kevin, anything more you'd add on that?
Well, maybe just to give another example of a similar challenge. Actually, a couple of years ago, a client of ours said, oh, we found this really cool new thing. It's like predictive incident analysis. So basically, you code into the system, I'm interested in chicken non-compliances in this part of the world. And then the system tells you all of the things that come up on social media and in the internet around that particular issue. So this is fascinating because looking at some of the questions that have come through, this could be potentially a predictive analytics around a social compliance issue. You hear news about discontent in a factory that could then potentially later lead to action in a factory, disruption that may be linked to lack of payments or overtime or X, Y, Z. Maybe some of that news is bubbling in the social media in advance, right? So you think this is a really good idea, but then when you look at the amount of information in social media and the amount of different stories like that you might want to mine out of social media at any given point in time, the volume of data that you need to be prepared to manage is so huge. It becomes paralyzing. So going back to that challenge, right, around grievance mechanisms and then what to do with that information, the same applies here. You have to think through the end use case and whether you're actually ready to manage all of this exciting information that could come through. You need a whole team, basically, to be sat there at the end of the system, watching what's going on an intraday basis and then figuring out how this impacts your supply chain. And there are countless other examples like that I think are out there. And a lot of it we will actually figure out through testing. Right? We found when we did worker voice technology, workers have self-identified as under 14. What do we do about that? Now we actually have to follow up and figure out whether they really were. Okay? Do we send someone on site, or do we send out a pulse questionnaire using the worker voice technology, which we did? We sent out a pulse questionnaire to the same, let's say, 50 workers. Only 10 of them are then under 14 because actually the rest changed their age. So you do a phone call through an independent point of view to find out whether those last 10 are still in 14, and maybe only one of them is now still in that category. So there's a lot of issues that come back around confidence of information, and progressively as we test these different solutions and tools, I think we figure out what are the right responses and the right processes that can be implemented.
Okay, thanks. I just want to take one question we've got from the app that's come in. I'll take that top one. Do you think that the rise of technological solutions in responsible sourcing will support worker empowerment, or will removing the human element mean that situations that fall into ethical grey areas are no longer considered with the appropriate nuances required in a case-by-case situation? That's a real key point that we started to make earlier. Alberto, any thoughts on that?
I've been a social auditor for many years, and I cannot imagine a future where we are losing the human element of it. So I would definitely go for technological solutions as a way to empower workers and support also the assurance work and the performance improvement. But in the end, none of us can probably imagine what technology will be like in 10 years' time, certainly not me. But I think the human element will have to be there, will have to remain. And when I saw the question, I thought of a case that happened in Italy, where I come from recently, where actually one worker was found that he was perfectly always on time at work, even in condition of extreme bad weather, you know, and never doing 1 minute overtime. So after investigation, they found out that the time card, the working clock machine, he brought it home. So he was clicking car from home, you know. So you've got all splendid sort of data, and that's showing perfect compliance of that situation. But if you're losing the human element, you'll probably not be able to spot these kind of issues. So for me, the future looks like an integration. That's what we are trying to do with the My Story concept, which is not abandoning the traditional approach, is really moving on and embracing the new technologies to enrich this approach.
Okay. I've got one final thought on that point, actually. There is a common view that technology takes the human element out of things. It doesn't. It places the human element, in a way, in the hands of software developers and programmers who are quite a long way removed from the environment in which their products and services will be used. And it is a fallacy, I think, to think that there's no human element. You're just dealing with different people who are not right on the front line, and that's a really important thing to keep in mind. So we are at the end of our session. Thank you all for listening. I hope you have found this useful. Thank you very much.